first online resources for domestic abuse awareness and for breast cancer on the internet. I also started the first woman-owned full-service internet company in 1995 called CyberGirl Inc. and the first global internet organization for women called WebGirls International. So these days, I help companies and nonprofit organizations with their digital marketing strategies, and I travel around the world speaking about the intersections of life, work, and the internet. So I've written 10 books. You can see some of them here, and many of them are about the internet, including Social Media Engagement for Dummies, The Complete Idiot's Guide to Crowdsourcing, and the Everything Blogging book. And now I'm writing my 11th book with Beth Cantor, who I've known since my early CyberGirl and WebGirls days back in 1995. Take it away, Beth.
Great. Thank you, Elisa, and thank you, Wild Apricot, for hosting us. I'm really delighted to be here. I've worked in the nonprofit sector 35 years, and like 25 years ago, I had a front row seat at the creation of a field, how nonprofits can use the internet for mission-driven work. And so my work is mostly as a trainer, and I've had the honor of working with thousands of nonprofits and social change activists on how to use their networks, social media, and measurement effectively, and more recently, leadership development. And I've traveled the world. I've done trainings on every continent of the world except for Antarctica. I spent 5 years as visiting scholar at the David and Lucille Packard Foundation, where I wrote The Network Nonprofit and Measuring the Network Nonprofit, which won the Terry McAdams Nonprofit Book Award in 2013. I just recently released the Emerging Leaders Playbook, and this was part of a leadership development program that I'm working on for the Packard Foundation for emerging leaders in the nonprofit sector. And I'm really delighted to be working on this next book project, the Happy Healthy Nonprofit, with Elisa, you know, a colleague I've known and admired her ever since I met her at a WebGirls meetup back in 1995. So if we can go to the agenda slide, great. So this is our agenda for the next hour. We're going to start with a very high-level overview of our book and share some ideas about how to practice being happier and healthier in 2016. So a few things to keep in mind. We're all learning together, so we really want you to share your small wins, your challenges, your questions, your resources. Please make use of that chat. And also to bear in mind that a lot of what the ideas that we're sharing, in order to put these in practice, it requires building habits, and it's always good to start small. And we'll talk a little bit more about this in the webinar. And again, encouraging you to use that chat. Please don't hesitate to ask questions, and we're going to pause along the way, take a few mindful moments to answer your questions. And so our metric for success of this webinar is that you can leave this hour with us and identify at least one self-care habit that you want to put into practice.
So let me tell you a little bit about our book project. The Happy Healthy Nonprofit is a manifesto for mindset change in the nonprofit sector. So we're raising conversations about the importance of self-care, particularly for nonprofit leaders, association executives, membership organizations, all of those of you out in the audience today, to help you avoid burnout and gain more sustaining energy for your work and for your life. So we're in the middle of writing this book right now. We're conducting interviews of people working in the nonprofit sector, and you can actually submit your own stories and advice to the SurveyMonkey link that you see on the screen, and we'll follow up with you to interview you. So if you're interested in that, also stay tuned to the end of this webinar to learn how we can bring you into our community, a Happy Healthy Nonprofit online community. It's a private Facebook group, and we'd love to have you join us. Now, please do keep in mind what we're sharing today. This is our thinking to date. It's still a work in progress, but we're really excited about putting it out there and getting your feedback. So, let's dig in. We start out talking about burnout and defining burnout. Here are some common steps to burnout in the nonprofit sector that's inspired by so many of the burnout studies that are already out there. But this is particular to us, and hopefully it sounds familiar to you only because we're going to try to fix it. Step one, you're passion-driven, idealistic, energized, hopeful. Step two, you're self-sacrificing. You're working long hours. You're having trouble sleeping. You try to use those sleepless nights to get things done that you haven't been able to during the day. Step three, you're chronically depleted. You still believe in the mission, but you're often too exhausted to work effectively. Most likely, nobody else is noticing that you're suffering because everyone is in the same condition. And step four, you're burned out. Your stress may be showing up as short temper, anxiety, panic attacks, insomnia, chronic illness, or worse. But you don't want to get there, and we don't want you to get there either.
So this is Beth, and we want to think a little bit about, what do we mean by happy, healthy? It's really a lot more than just your physical health. It's this broader concept of well-being. And it includes all these interrelated areas where we can practice self-care. And we call this the 5 spheres of happy, healthy. And it's all about relationships to ourselves, other people, our environment, our work, and of course our technology. And in the book, we cover self-care practices in these areas both from an individual lens as well as an organizational culture lens.
So we've been doing a lot of research, and in the book, we talk about integrating self-care as an integral part of work, instead of something separate or extra. So self-care is not a luxury. It's not some perks that you enjoy now and then, only to continue the bad habits and unhealthy ways that we're falling into. So we believe that self-care is an organizational responsibility as well as an individual responsibility. So we'll be covering some tangible steps that you can take to add self-care into your daily routine and move from a chronic state of stress to a chronic state of self-care.
Great, so let's focus for a moment on what we mean by self-care and self-care for individuals, okay? So self-care is, it's about revitalization. And it includes any deliberate and consistent habits you create to enhance your overall well-being. So a common self-care analogy is the instruction we hear from flight attendants when we travel someplace. Put on your oxygen mask first, then help others. The translation is, you're no good to anybody, not your family, not your friends, your community, not your nonprofit organization, your coworkers, the people or the clients you serve if you're stressed out, burned out, depleted of energy, and unable to perform at your best. So self-care practices help you deal with all the stress that is in our sector. And we're going to share what those practices are that can help you replenish your energy and also have the added benefit of helping your nonprofit be more effective in delivering its mission. But before we get started with our tips, we've just thrown a lot at you. So if you have any questions, please feel to type them into the chat box as we go, and we'll check in with Lori to see if you have anything to say. So Lori, any questions so far?
I'm not seeing many questions yet, but we did ask a few people if they've hit that burnout phase, and a few of them have said they have. So hopefully these habits will help. But everyone, if you do have questions or comments, feel free to put them in. Here's one from John Pollard quickly. Have you heard of self-parenting? Does that ring a bell?
Love the concept.
I haven't come across that term yet. We'll hopefully learn more from him about that later.
Okay, well, I would say keep going, and it sounds like this is just what the people ordered. So keep going with your tips.
Great. So let's get to our first tip on the next slide. There we go. Okay, so the first tip is to declare a self-care bill of rights, okay? You need to put on that oxygen mask first without any guilt, okay? So let me tell you a story about where this all came from. And it's a story about a colleague that I've had the pleasure of working with over the years. Her name is Aisha Moore. And she is a health justice advocate and a nonprofit consultant. She works in the DC area. She came up with this idea of a self-care bill of rights because she found herself into some trouble because she was totally ignoring her own self-care. She was working 80 hours a week. She wasn't exercising. She was skipping on her sleep. She wasn't taking any time for herself. Her life became her work. So one day, going into work, she fainted, and she had to be wheeled out of the office in a stretcher. And when she went in to see her doctor, he told her her symptoms were from stress. And her response was, stress? I love my job. So she hadn't even noticed the toll it was taking on her health, on her body, on her mind. And so she started on a path of self-care and revitalization, and her first step was to declare this Bill of Rights about self-care so she would not ignore it or feel guilty doing it. So let's take a look at Aisha's self-care Bill of Rights. Okay, so this is her self-care Bill of Rights. She put a flag in the sand saying she's important and she's going to take care of herself. So, your Bill of Rights might not have phrases like put self-love into action or pamper yourself. You may have phrases like give to others in this world in a way that energizes you or get more sleep, or whatever it is. It has to be meaningful to you. So as we present these ideas on the webinar, start to think about what you're going to put in your self-care Bill of Rights. So what I'm going to have you do, we're going to hit the pause button for a few seconds, and I want you just to jot down a few phrases or a few ideas of what's in your head right now about what would be in your self-care Bill of Rights.
Okay, and Beth, while people are just on the pause, there's a bit of an echo on your mic, so I don't know if you have another mic activated, but just might want to look at
No, I don't.
Okay.
Is it better now?
I think it's better. Still a bit of an echo.
Is this better?
There's oddly still an echo, but it's better. You come in clearly, there's just a bit of a thing. That's okay, we'll just keep going.
Okay. Well, it's like one of those things. When things go wrong, everything's going to go wrong. You just kind of roll with it and not let it stress you out. So now everybody's had a few seconds to think about self-care, and as we go on to share some of the tactics and ideas, we want you to just think about what you want to put in your self-care Bill of Rights, and giving yourself the permission to practice self-care. Putting it into practice is really all about changing your habits.
So, back to me. This is Eliza, and when we're talking about habit change, it all starts with you. You pick a habit that you want to change. That's really the first place you go. Now, Gretchen Rubin talks about the 4 foundation habits that can help you with habit change, and those are getting enough sleep, getting some exercise, creating external order, and managing your eating and drinking. So we'll talk a little more about those foundation habits in a bit, but after you pick your habit, you decide on a cue. For example, I use an app called Fitbolt on my web browser, and it reminds me every 15 minutes to stop and stretch if I'm sitting in front of the computer. So a cue is something that will trigger the new behavior and act as a reminder or a nudge. Then you track what you're doing. So you figure out a tracking system, which could be a habit change diary, a smartphone app, or a wearable like Fitbit, or some other way of tracking. Then you check in. You check in with yourself, or better yet, you check in with an accountability buddy. Then you do it. It's the routine of doing. So your habit becomes a routine. Your routine becomes a habit when you do it regularly. Now here are a couple of tracking apps, and there's Fitbolt on the upper left-hand side. Literally, it's on my web browser. It opens up and expands and shows me how to do those exercises. The rest are just a variety of tracking apps that give you feedback and data as you work toward better habits. So, next tip.
Great, this is Beth, and the next tip is one of those basics: get enough sleep. So according to the CDC, insufficient sleep is a public health problem, okay? And I think culture blogger Maria Popova of Brain Picking said it best. We tend to wear our ability to get by on little sleep as a sort of badge of honor that validates our work ethic. But what really, it's a profound failure of self-respect and of priorities. So sleep deprivation, or making a habit of skimping on your much-needed sleep, does not let us perform or do our best for our nonprofits. So how much sleep do you need? You know, the amount of hours per night varies from individual, and it's different based on different ages. But the National Sleep Foundation recommends that adults need between 7 and 9 hours of sleep per month. I mean, per day, per night. Would be great if we only needed that amount of sleep per month. So let's talk about how we set a habit of getting enough sleep. I learned the hard way about cheating myself out of a good night's sleep and what it can really do to your well-being. And if you're not well rested, you can't concentrate, you're irritable, and really you don't function at your best. So I decided to make this change, and I'm a little bit of a data geek, so I conducted a little bit of an experiment. I used my Fitbit to set a sleep goal, and I measured my hours of sleep per night. And I also kept a diary of how I felt the next day, functioning on specific amounts of sleep. And so what I discovered is that my magic number of hours per sleep of night was 7.4. And so that's what I set as my goal. Don't always get it, but that's what I aim for. And one thing that, making this a commitment to habit change, it meant that I had to look around and reflect on my nighttime routine. So I had to stop answering emails, late at night and doing work right before I went to bed, because I found that it jazzed me up and I wouldn't get to sleep. And I had to start making myself go to bed earlier. So if you want to prioritize sleep, you need to set a goal, you need to monitor it, and you need to make a habit. Okay, so let's go to our next tip, which is don't just sit there, okay? This is an infographic from the Washington Post, and you can see from this, many of us spend half of our waking hours sitting, and this inactivity really can cause some health problems. So a few ways that sitting's really killing us, there's organ damage, there's muscle degeneration, there's leg disorders, bad back, and I think one of the worst, which is trouble at the top, brain fog, the worst thing for work. So that's why sitting really has been dubbed the new smoking. So here's the tip, if we go to the next slide, which is stand up at work. Do a standing desk hack. Standing desks don't have to be expensive. You can create one, as my colleague Beverly Trainer Wenger did. She created this standing desk out of a music stand and a cardboard carton. And you know what? You don't have to get a standing desk for everybody on your staff either. One nonprofit I know has purchased a communal standing desk, and it's in the office, and people are free to use it when they want to work standing up to take a break from sitting. So here's a couple of pro tips if you decide to get a standing desk. that you need to invest in a small, soft pad for your feet because they tend to get sore from standing. And make sure that your standing posture and your desk setup is ergonomically correct because you don't want to create some other problems from standing. And like any other habit change, you want to start with short periods of standing and then sitting until you build up enough stamina to stand for longer periods. And if you look at that URL there, there's a lot of information about how to select a standing desk and where to find low-cost ones. So we can go to the next slide. So let me show you about how to start a habit of moving more often. And I've become, if you follow me, you know that I'm a huge advocate of this. I'm a big advocate of walking as work. So I got started by changing my sitting habit. I strapped on my Fitbit, and I got a baseline of my activity. And I discovered that I only walked about 2,000 steps a day. And so this really forced me to contemplate, you know, how I was spending my time, most of it on my butt in front of the computer or on the phone. And, you know, I even used my keyboard as a lunch tray. So I started off with a really modest step goal, but I added more steps incrementally each week. And I started to ask questions like, you know, what if I walk for part of my lunch hour instead of sitting and eating lunch at my desk? And I went, wow, that added 2,000 steps. So each week I upped my goal slowly, and I got to 10,000, and now I'm even beyond that. So there's lots of benefits that I felt. First of all, you know, I dropped weight, dropped 30 pounds. I lowered my cholesterol, but the most important thing for me, it helped me get rid of that brain fog. It helped me manage my stress, and it helped me have the ability to think clearer and get more done. So let me give you a couple of tips about shifting from sitting to just getting more movement yourself. So first of all, don't think of walking or movement as exercise. It's really a great time to think about a challenging work task. So you're not goofing off, you're thinking about work. Also, develop some self-awareness and realize when you're not productive, when you're sitting, and just take a 5-minute walk around your desk. You know, it's like rebooting the computer. If you do a lot of phone calls, think about doing those phone calls on your mobile phone and doing them while you're walking. I do that all the time. And here's a formula to think about that comes from the ergonomic experts. It's called the 20, 8, and 2. You want to do 20 minutes sitting, 8 minutes standing, and 2 minutes stretching. So another practice is doing walking meetings. And these are great. And here's an example from an organization called Project Kesher, which does women's leadership programs, and their CEO, who is Karen Bloom. And so she's a nonprofit staffer who knows the value of walking at work. Karen not only talks the talk, but she walks the talk. I know it's a bad pun, but she does regular walks and talks with her staff when they do one-on-one meetings. She does this in small groups, and she even does one-on-ones with her funders to discuss programs and proposals, which I think it's really great. One practice that they have that's I think is pretty awesome, if I might say, is that they have a weekly staff brainstorming and problem-solving meeting, and they do this as a group hike. When Karen is in a sitting meeting, and they also do sitting meetings, and they try to tackle a difficult problem or they get stuck, she stops everybody and she says, let's put this on an item for our hiking meeting. And she says that the walking and brainstorming that happens on their hiking meetings is really just a lot better. Somehow the fresh air and the movement really helps them be a little bit more innovative than sitting on their butts in a stuffy conference room. So get a move on it. Try to make walking as part of your work, either alone or with others in your organization.
Hey, Beth, it looks like we have a question from BJ Roshinsky. Waving to her
Hi,
virtually.
BJ.
What was the rule Beth just mentioned? 20 minutes sitting, 8 minutes standing, and
2 minutes stretching. And it comes from the Cornell Institute of Ergonomics. I forget the researchers' names. And also from Dr. James Levine at the Mayo Clinic. they're kind of like the thought leader or researchers in this area, and so that's their recommendation.
Great. And Lori, anything else before I move on to the next tip?
No, just lots of great comments and feedback as you're talking here. And in fact, Terry and I are implementing some of these as you speak. We're sitting up straighter, standing up.
I did the same thing. All of a sudden, I started sitting up straight, then I stood up. But let's move on at the moment from movement to mindfulness. So tip number 5 is embrace mindfulness. And now, to be clear, mindfulness is not meditation. I think people are starting to use that interchangeably, but that is not correct. Mindfulness is about awareness, it's about focus, paying attention, being attentive. A clinical definition of mindfulness is attending to ongoing events and experiences in a receptive and non-judgmental way. So that even though mindfulness is not meditation, if you were to meditate, you'd be stretching and training your mindfulness muscles. So let me tell you a little bit about my practice. My health practitioners over the years have recommended meditation and yoga to me. And I've always made excuses. I've always ignored their advice. I just couldn't get into it. Like, first of all, meditation, how do you do that? And yoga, I just couldn't find the time. And then I discovered meditation apps. And I found I could use them at my desk or while sitting on a plane or in my hotel room on a business trip, even before I went to bed, and suddenly I was meditating. So now scientists have found that meditating literally can change your brain by increasing your gray matter in different parts, including your frontal cortex, and that's associated with your working memory and executive decision making. So meditation can change your brain. Now in terms of yoga, my yoga practice is like all over the map. It's now and then. Every other year I might take a class for a couple of weeks or a month. But I started doing something regularly. I call it boga. Maybe it already has been invented. Bed yoga, not to be mistaken with doga, which is dog yoga. So when my alarm goes off in the morning, I just start a slow series of stretches, particularly my head, neck, arms, shoulders, which for someone on the computer all the time, that really suffers. And I hold these stretches for 20 to 30 seconds each. Legs, feet, fingers. I finish the ritual by sitting up and folding over. I touch my toes and I hold the stretch for 30 seconds. And this entire thing takes 5 minutes. And then I start my day. So doing what's good for you, it doesn't have to be hard. Here's a couple of mindfulness apps in case you're interested. I particularly like Headspace and Calm. Take a yoga break. Gives you these little illustrations to start doing yoga just on the fly. A lot of them, like Umbana, have meditation audios that you can follow, guided meditation. So that's just a couple of apps. And we can provide links to them later for you. So some of the benefits of mindfulness at work, regardless of the practice that you use to be more mindful, it includes regulating your emotions, reducing emotional exhaustion, and increasing your job satisfaction. So this is from research that we have found and that we will include in our book. So a 2014 study even showed employees who took online courses in mindfulness were less stressed, more resilient, and more energetic. So while mindfulness and meditation are just two ways of changing your brain, there are so many other ways to do this. And if your work, like mine, is constantly keeping you in your head, doing physical things can shift your brain from one way of processing information and signals and impulses to another. So just simply using a different part of your brain in a different way can pull your thinking out of a rut. And here's one way that I began rewiring my own brain. So when I was dealing with a particularly stressful time at work, I suddenly took up painting. Now, I have no background in art, and nobody ever told me painting would be good for you. But I kept remembering how great I feel every time I would color with my daughter or draw or do arts and crafts. I just felt instinctively doing art would be helpful to me. So I went to Walmart and I bought some cheap paints, paintbrushes, some canvas paper, and I just started painting. And it was really, really hard because I couldn't let go of my logical thinking. And then I couldn't let go of my self-critical thinking. And I kept censoring myself and editing my painting. And I tried so hard to make things look right. I was using my computer and my internet brain to try to paint. And then one day, I just started to make swirls and curlicues and began to let go of this need to make perfect art. And suddenly, I just let myself paint. So I shifted my brain from a narrow, linear way of thinking to a more open, expansive one. It helped reduce my stress and to think more creatively at work.
And of course, the latest fad in mindfulness and creativity happens to be adult coloring books. And in case you haven't noticed, they're topping the top sellers on Amazon. And while there's no specific research on adult coloring books and their contribution to health, although people do point to the benefits from art therapy, they are a lot of fun. And they're not just fun, they can also help you de-stress, because a lot of them have these very intricate designs, and you have to be very mindful and focused to color them in. And I'm a huge fan of magic markers, so I know I just love adult coloring books. There's also a lot of apps, coloring apps. It's interesting that they're categorized as games, but they can also be mesmerizing. And while I really prefer the tactical sense of picking up the marker and the paper, coloring on the paper, the apps are really great if you have to do a lot of travel for work, because it doesn't take a lot of room on the airplane. So there's many different ways to practice mindfulness, as we have just shared with you. And here's a tip on how to begin to make it a habit. Okay, so the essence of mindfulness really is about taking a pause and taking a breath. And there's basically two beginner techniques. The first one is really just to bring gentle and consistent attention to your breath, breathing in and breathing out, and really trying to focus just for 2 minutes. And if you start to think about other things, you kind of bring your attention back. And the second technique is really just to sit without an agenda and just be without doing for just 2 minutes. And if you can spend 5 minutes just alternating between those two, and those apps that Elisa mentioned can certainly help you, that's the essence of mindfulness. So for me, I wanted to start a meditation habit, but I found that I just didn't do it. And then I discovered I just didn't have the right cue. So I realized every morning while I was making coffee that it took my coffee machine probably about 3-5 minutes to actually percolate that coffee. So I decided that I would bring my chair, I would put it in front of the coffee machine, I'd push the button, and I would practice the simple mindfulness technique for a few minutes to begin my day. And before I know it, I had created this habit of mindfulness. And then I also tend to use it when I get overwhelmed at work, when I have so many things on my to-do list that I don't know what to do first. I just take a break from that and I do a little bit of quiet breathing, and then I just kind of visualize what my most important task is, and it really helps me to take that few minutes of mindfulness to get off the hamster wheel. And so we're going to take, actually, some mindfulness right now and take a breath and ask Lori, are there any questions?
So I do have one question, and then I'll just share a few comments coming through. So someone wanted to know, what was the name of the study that shows online mindfulness training works?
I have that in a reference list that we were going to provide everyone with. And of course, I don't have those notes in front of me, but there were actually, that very slide included information from 3 different studies. A lot of these studies come from the UK, just so you know. They're very much ahead of the game in terms of organizational mindfulness practices and effects on work, as is Canada. So, so I believe the one that I referenced directly was from the UK.
And there's also studies from Herbert Benson at Beth Israel Hospital in Boston. They're kind of some of the leading researchers on mindfulness and its health impacts.
Excellent. Well, we're just hearing some good comments from people about how they practice this. Laurel just wrote in, she practices mindfulness while doing the dishes. And Norman just shared with us that the main thing he's learned in meditation is not to worry when your mind wanders, but to patiently return to your breath without any judgment. So everyone's sharing these great things, so I thought I'd read them out. And Jennifer just said Headspace app is great. So maybe we'll add some of that to the resource list, as well as self-parenting. John Polliter has shared some good advice on self-parenting. We'll look into that.
I can't wait to read some of his comments on that. And BJ does have a question, and Beth, this is a good one before we move on. How do you do walking meetings without excluding people who have disabilities or differing physical capacities? That's an excellent question.
Well, that's a great question. And one of the best principles is to say that the slowest walker sets the pace. And certainly walking meetings with groups, and I've done them with people in wheelchairs, we all slow the pace to keep up with the person in a wheelchair. Or if there's somebody that is physically having trouble walking, we take frequent breaks. One of the things with a walking meeting is that you have to take that into account. You could set a thing at the beginning, say the slowest walker sets the pace, and it's okay. And then do plan for breaks along the way. It's not, the purpose of the walking meeting is not to run a marathon or get exercise. It's really to stimulate the moving and build the relationship and to incorporate a little movement into the work.
Great stuff.
I'm going to move to the next slide.
Great.
Great. So the next slide is about managing your energy and attention. So most of us think that the secret sauce to our work productivity is time management. And while time management is important, also important is managing your energy and your attention. So sleep researchers have actually found that our brain during the day only focuses in these 90 to 120 minute cycles before it needs a break of 10 minutes, 20 minutes to replenish the energy. And these cycles are called ultradian cycles. It's similar to circadian rhythms at night and our sleep cycles. We have these daytime cycles called ultradian cycles, which sort of regulate our energy. So like other things in nature, our energy is like the ocean. We have a high tide, peak energy, peak attention, and a low tide where we have trouble concentrating and we really need to rest and replenish. So the key and the tip here is to sync your work tasks with your ultradian rhythms. You design your workday based on them. So this is my Google Calendar with my ideal workday, and the purple is the breaks. And to work in these kind of shorter 90-minute, 120-minute chunks. And I know that you can't have complete control of your calendar, especially inside organizations when there's a lot of expectations and a lot of demands and a lot of meetings. But if you are aware of your energy flows and you try to plan out your work task according to that and to sync them to those ultradian cycles, you will be able to replenish your energy, you will be way more productive, and you'll get a lot done. So the next tip is about managing your attention, which is also important. So this is really important if you find yourself being distracted, and certainly if you have to do a lot of your work on the internet, that can be distracting. So this is a technique I learned a few years ago from the book 18 Minutes a Day by Peter Bregman. He's also a blogger on the Harvard Business Review site. He's fantastic. So here's how the technique works. You have 5 minutes in the morning. You write on an index card your 3 most important things to accomplish. You set your mobile phone, your iPhone, to beep you every hour, and then you ask yourself whether you're on track. And you spend 5 minutes at the end of the day and ask, what did you accomplish? What didn't you accomplish, and why? And so you might think that beeping yourself would be distracting, but really what you're doing is reminding yourself of your focus and training your attention. And I have to admit that I never would have completed my second book if I had not used this technique. So manage your energy and your tension as well as your time. And this is really important when it comes to tech.
This is Aliza, and this is my pet topic, tech wellness. Tip number 7. So if we take a holistic view of our physical, mental, emotional, and spiritual sides, the way that we're using our tech tools, not only for work, but for daily communications and connections, is drastically altering our overall happiness and health. The way that we're using technology today is affecting not only our relationship with ourselves, but all of the relationships that we described earlier in the 5 spheres of happy, healthy. Let's break down some of the negative effects that technology is having on us. Physically, we're getting text neck, and that's what this image is, text neck. Our shoulders, backs, arms, wrists, hands, we're getting pain that we never used to experience before. We're seeing a lot more eye strain. Mentally, distraction, an inability to focus, obsessive compulsive behavior around our technology, dependence, and I hate to say it, addiction. There's something that our constantly connected brains experience, and some people call it FOMO, fear of missing out. And then there's nomophobia, the fear of not having our mobile device or that it's about to run out of battery. And some people experience phantom vibration syndrome, where we think our phone is vibrating even when it's not even with us. Emotionally, we could be experiencing more nervousness, anxiety, frustration, even depression. And spiritually, we might be feeling emptier, lonelier, disconnected, isolated. So addressing our tech wellness requires many of the changes we've already discussed, but particularly awareness and habit change. So an important part of tech wellness is to develop these better habits about how we use our technology daily. And it means changing from a mindless use of smartphones and mobile devices to being more in control, more aware, more mindful. So this image is something that I've done at home to consciously remove the temptations of reaching for the device, holding the device, carrying the device around at home for myself and for my family. So I set up a charging station at our entryway. So now we cannot just grab our device, and instead we have to stop what we're doing, walk through the house to go to the charging station to get the device. And they're not charging in our bedrooms, and they don't distract us from our conversations. So are we perfect about this? No. But by making a small change at the house, we're more aware of the amount of time we spend on our devices and when we reach for them, and it helps keep rude interruptions to a minimum. This can be applied at work as well. So tech wellness, like any self-care practice, requires your attention, which is the mindfulness, setting boundaries, which is that so-called balance, forming good habits, which is our behavior, and eliminating negative influences and having a positive attitude. So when your relationship with your technology is healthier, you become healthier and happier. So I think maybe now I saw a few other questions. Some of it goes back to where we were before. Beth, could you clarify the circadian versus ultradian cycle again? And
sure. Circadian rhythms is our 24-hour clock, and those are that's what gets thrown off when we fly someplace and we skip time zone. It's known as jet lag, and ultradian rhythms is our rhythm when we are awake during the day.
Okay, good. And then somebody said the 18-minute technique sounds a bit like Pomodoro method. We actually took out the slide for Pomodoro method to make sure we stayed within time, but it is kind of similar, isn't it?
Yes, it is. It's a great technique. I love it too. It's great
Somebody
for
wanted.
procrastination.
Oh, good. Well,
So,
I
in
was just
keeping
going to
with
say.
our time and keeping
Okay, go ahead. Yeah.
clock, I will not procrastinate from talking about this tip any longer.
All
So,
right, go for it.
so I have to ask, are you choosing to work on undemanding, low-priority tasks instead of important work priorities? Are you rearranging paper clips on your desk? Okay, that might be procrastination, and that could be a problem if it's become a regular habit. And it's also one of those early warning signs of burnout, okay? So how do we get past it? Well, the first, if we go to the next slide, is to have some self-awareness, okay? You have to understand why you're procrastinating. And if you go to the next slide, you can see that there's a field guide to procrastinators, So you can actually get a sense of what is your work avoidance behavior, Are you cleaning, making lists, doing internet research, or just completely avoiding it? So what you have to do first is kind of discover recognize it, and then challenge it. What's at the root of you not completing this task? Is it boredom? You don't have the skills? Did you say yes to too many projects? What is it? And then once you've had that understanding, you have to sort of pay close attention to it. And here is a tip to get past it. And if we go to the next slide, eat the frog. And this is kind of similar to Pomodoro, but eat the frog is based on an old saying that is, the first thing you do each morning is to eat a live frog, you can get through your day with the satisfaction of knowing that it's probably the worst thing that's going to happen to you all day. Your frog is the one thing you're most likely to procrastinate on if you don't do something about it right now. So if you tackle that or eat that frog, it's going to give you the greatest positive impact on your workday and results in the moment, and it feels really good. So if you find yourself procrastinating, eat that frog.
Just say no is another option. So part of getting more done is learning when to say no. Set limits and say no to set boundaries, to keep expectations of others in check, and to keep your workload more focused and relevant to your roles and responsibilities. Plus, saying no is just better for you physically, mentally, emotionally. It leaves you room to breathe. Here's a simple path to saying no. You set intentional priorities. Establish clearly what is important to you that requires your time, attention, and effort, and write these down. Then you weigh requests against your current state of workload, your home life responsibilities, and your long-term goals, and be honest with yourself. Then you evaluate the time, resources, and attention that saying yes will take. What does it take away from you? What have you established that's important that you can't do if you say yes? And then just say no.
Okay, that's easier said than done. Believe me, I'm one of those that used to say yes to too many requests and had trouble saying no, and it got me into loads of trouble, stress and overload. And a few years ago, I saw this talk by Derek Sievers, and it was all about setting limits. And the quote was, the punchline that really stuck with me was, if you say yes, it should be a hell yeah. Otherwise, it should be a no. So I thought this advice was really great, but I had a hard time putting it into practice because it was black and white. And so being the data nerd, I decided it was another data and reflection process. So I started to analyze the types of requests I was getting and whether or not I was saying yes or no. And I found I had 4 categories. I had a hell yeah. I had a I would like this to be a yes, but. And then I had this should be a no, but I'm having trouble saying no. And then I had a hell no. And so I found it really, really useful to examine why I was having trouble saying no, or what the yes buts were, and then I also found that it was really helpful to give myself some practice and some canned responses using some of the techniques that Aliza has mentioned to make it easier and more graceful for me to say no. So I practiced this actually with an accountability buddy, and it's an exercise that helps you learn to know what it feels like to say no in your throat. So Aliza, let's demonstrate it.
Beth, will you jump off a cliff?
No.
Come on, Beth. I really need you to jump off a cliff.
No. Okay, so that's not so graceful, but it gives me what it feels like to say no, okay? So now let's demonstrate being a little bit more graceful, saying no, and using a couple of techniques.
Beth, would you jump off a cliff? Because you're really, really good at jumping off a cliff.
Aliza, thanks for thinking of me, but, I'm going to have to take a pass on that.
Well, Beth, I have a lot of money to offer you to jump off that cliff.
Aliza, thank you so much for, offering the money to jump off the cliff and for acknowledging my cliff jumping skills. I really, really appreciate it. And it's great that you feel so passionately about me participating, but I'm really backed up with other priorities, and I just can't commit to jumping off a cliff today, and delivering you success. I'm very likely to stumble, literally, and not complete it, I'd rather say no now than sorry later. So is there a better way that you can accomplish your goal without having someone jump off a cliff?
Well, I could really use a cliff jumper right now. I need somebody to jump off this cliff. Any recommendations?
Yeah, that's really great, It's not really my sweet spot, as you know, but I have this great colleague. I'd love to make an introduction, and I know that they would be delighted to jump off a cliff for you. Okay? So so here are some of the techniques that I used. I listened to Aliza's request. I acknowledged her request. I tried to find out why she needed this. I tried to reduce the scope. I tried to solve her problem, and I kept being polite and firm. So, should we pause here and see if there's any other questions that have come up?
Let's get to your last tip, because we're getting close to time, and then there's a couple good doozy questions here for the end that we can maybe.
Okay, great. So we'll fly. Okay, so the last tip is to create a self-care plan, and with the materials, we have a self-care assessment and checklist that will help you think about activities that you can create habits around good self-care.
And here is a self-care plan, an outline. We'll actually give you a copy of this afterwards. We'll provide everyone with a blank worksheet where it covers physical wellness, mindfulness, technology, emotional, spiritual wellness, relationships, and you could fill that in to get you started on your self-care plan. And as we mentioned before, we also want to invite you to our Happy Healthy Nonprofit online community, a private Facebook group. You can see the URL there. And if you go to facebook.com/group/Happy Healthy Nonprofit, you could ask to join, and we'd love to have you be part of sort of this tips, sharing, and accountability group. So please do feel free to join us there.
Great. Thank you.
And
oh, sorry.
That's fine. Yeah, I'm saying that's it, and we'd love to field any further questions that we have time for and furnish you with resources after as well.
Excellent. That was great, especially the cliff jumping series. Both Terry and I had a good laugh during that. So we've got some great questions here, and we may not be able to get to all of them, but for some of you, I would encourage you to join that Facebook group where maybe Beth and Aliza can comment more in depth. But so here's one. How to your no, saying no to things. How exactly do you say no to your CEO or your boss?
Well, That's those I'd like to say no, but I'm having trouble requests. And so I think you really have to really consider, there's sometimes where you have to say yes, in those instances, and you have to really consider the trade-offs very carefully about saying no. And then you also have to consider the request, is it reasonable? Is it doable? Is there some way you can negotiate around that request? If it's been a request to do an additional project, can you negotiate around not doing another priority? It's really about having that conversation. And I think the advice really about is not to really have a knee-jerk yes or no, but really you just need to consider things.
Right. And on that note, again, I don't know if we can get too far into this, but several people have brought up in different ways, realizing that self-care is important. How do you actually get the rest of your organization on board with that, including the leadership and your CEO? Do you have any quick tips? Like, for instance, Celeste said that one of her directors sent out an email about proper etiquette or best practices or something like the chart or anything like that. Any quick tips to share?
Well, I think that a lot of the things that we're doing right now to get our book written is identifying the research out there and identifying other organizations who have great practices. So I think sometimes leadership, whether it be the board or the executive director, they need proof. They need some kind of tangible, real proof. So the scientific studies and the examples of the American Heart Association, for example, and their incredible wellness plan that we will cover. Those are the kinds of things that help sell through the idea and doesn't leave anybody hanging as if this were some kind of novelty, but it's really established out there and they could be part of that movement.
Yeah, I think the most important thing is to show the connection between the bottom line, because we know that's what CEOs and boards are really concerned about. So there's reduced healthcare costs, but goes beyond that. There's a huge link to productivity. And so what you're doing is saving time, and you're more effective at getting work done. And the other area to look at is how does this make your organization attractive to work for? Very important, especially as we think about talent development, which is a big issue in our sector, and attracting high-quality people to work for us. A good article to read for examples is the annual Nonprofit Times study on the 50 best nonprofits to work for. There's lots of great examples in there.
Great. So on that note, I see a few people here who have some tips, so I encourage you to visit healthyhappynonprofit.org where they can get involved, right? Beth and Eliza, they can actually share some of what's going on.
Absolutely.
Okay. So that's great.
Yes, and we're looking to interview people. So if you'd like to be in the book, please do get in touch right away because we're starting interviews now.
Great. So thank you so much. That was a wonderful presentation. I'm just going to grab presenter control back here and show my screen. Is that showing properly? Yes. So thank you, Beth and Eliza, for joining us, and thank you, everyone else, for joining us. And I just want to remind you that we do these webinars every 2 weeks now, and this one's kind of a good segue from what we just spoke about how to actually transform and reinvent your culture at your organization. So we have John Mattoni joining us. He's a very well-respected speaker and trainer in more the corporate world, but he's going to be talking about some of the things you need to be doing at your organization to help bring about this change, which is something actually we're doing here at Wild Apricot. So you can find this in the Membership Academy on our website, so you can just go there and sign up. So that's on January 27th. And for those of you who don't know, we also have a course available that you can get at courses.wildapricot.com. It's about how to run more effective meetings. We don't have anything on walking meetings, but maybe that will be an additional chapter at some point. And if you're new to Wild Apricot and you're looking for a solution to manage your memberships, events, or website, check out our software. And if you want to find out more, you can attend our demos. We have them every week. So next week we'll be at 2 or 3, or you can just call us and ask some questions. But our demo shows how our software works. Okay, and that's it. And thank you, everyone, for your comments and for sharing. And thank you again, Beth and Elisa, for joining us. That was a fantastic presentation.
Great. Thank you so much.
Thanks.
I'm going
everyone.
for a walk.
Me too.
Bye, everyone.